Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and I am back with the E39 M5 and doing a bit of a suspension refresh. If you've seen my previous videos, you know I've recently installed a brand new set of ground control coilovers, so things feel much better already. But I didn't want to stop there, and I wanted to go through and refresh other components as needed. I'm also trying to fix a bit of a shimmy or some vibrations that I can feel through the steering wheel when I'm doing between 50 and 60 and sometimes under braking. And this is common on these cars, especially when you have worn control arm bushings. So I'm going to go ahead and replace both control arms in the front as well as the sway bar links, and that should pretty much do it. The only thing left to refresh will be the steering components, tie rods, etc., and I'm gonna leave those for another time. So I got this front suspension kit from FCP Euro. Comes with everything you need, and these are Lemforder parts, so good stuff, OE quality parts. And you have here the shorter or the Wishbone control arm. We have the thrust arm here, and your sway bar link. I also got some brand new hardware just in case, because I want to replace bolts and nuts and everything. If you want to make your life a lot easier, you're going to need some special tools, and ball joint separators will cut a lot of the frustration and time out of this job. I do suggest you get some of these, especially a large one like this for the Wishbone arm, and you'll see why in a minute. But yeah, definitely ball joint separators. So get your keys in the ignition so that you can turn this thing around to start and have plenty of space to work with. We're going to start with the sway bar link. Sway bar link out of the way, and now we can move on to the control arms. We're going to start with the Wishbone, and one thing that I found, it is easier to start with the ball joint side and then move over to the frame bushing. So we'll start here. Now here's a trick I learned while working on my E30 a while back with the ball joint separators, and is that once you get the nut out, washer or whatever's in the way, you can put the nut back on there, and I would get it back in just enough so that it is flat against the stud with the threads, and that just gives you more surface area to work with when using the ball joint separator. Not only that, but let's say you wanted to remove this arm without actually replacing it. This allows you to protect the threads with the tools while you take it out, so I always do that. And here's where the big ball joint separator comes in very handy. It's the only one that you'll be able to fit on a ball joint such as this. Alright, so that's quite a bit of pressure. I'm just gonna leave it there and come back in a minute. That thing just never gets old. It's always a big scare when it pops. So we can go over to the frame side now. And that was gonna be 18 on one side, 16 on the bolt on the other side. These ones aren't actually that bad, and the boots are in good shape. Not sure about this side of the bushing though. But, I wasn't about to get under here, go through all this just to replace one of the control arms. I figure if I'm gonna do this job, I'm doing it one time, get everything out and replaced. And of course, once you remove this control arm, the steering knuckle and struts and everything is gonna be a little bit loose. So what I'm gonna do is put the new one in just so that I keep everything in place. I'm not going to tight or torque anything down, but just to keep it sturdy while I work on the thrust arm next. Alright, so we have one down and one to go, and the next one is going to be the thrust arm, and we need to remove this ball joint here, the one right in the middle. One thing to note is that you will need to have enough clearance between the strut here and the nut in order to fit a wrench, your torque wrench when you're putting it back together, etc. So if you were dealing with a stock suspension, you would have to release the pinch bolt here and use a pry bar to basically pull the whole knuckle down or push the strut upwards so that you have enough space. Lucky me, the ground control coilover is already short enough, so I don't need to do that. I have just enough space to get my tools in here and deal with that. But just something to keep in mind. And for this one, you can use the standard ball joint separator tool. It's big enough to barely fit, as you can see here. You may have to hit it a little bit to get the right grip. I use my rubber mallet over there just to get it in place. And now we're ready to snap this off. I usually just get a breaker bar for the last couple of turns. That way I can be at least 2 feet away from it. And I'm going to do the same thing as I did earlier. I'm just going to let the tool sit there and apply pressure for me for a few minutes, and I'll be back. And that one went out fairly quickly. I didn't even get a chance to capture the bang on camera. Not that I'm complaining. Let's move on. And it is now time to remove the bolt that attaches the thrust arm to the frame. And for that, the first thing you're going to want to do is remove the plastic covering that's in the way so that you can get your tools in there. You can see mine on the ground over here already. And the other thing we need to get out of the way is the sway bar, because this bolt is really long, as you'll see, and the sway bar is in the way. So we don't need to actually remove the sway bar completely. We're just going to detach the bushing bracket here. There's 2 bolts. I believe these are 13 mil. And that'll give you, I guess, another inch or 2 of clearance to push it down a little bit and get this bolt out. And that should be enough. Now we have to take this bolt out, and that is probably the most tedious part of this job. And for that, you'll notice that the bolt is so long that as you're pulling it out, you're gonna find all sorts of things in the way, starting with the sway bar, which we've already taken care of, but the steering components as well. So you'll just have to play with it. As you pull it out, you can play with the steering and move it back and forth until you can get it out. Some of these bolts may be really seized in there, depends on how long they've been there for, etc. You can see this one has a lot of rust already, so there we go. There you go. It's definitely a big bolt, and this one's all rusty. Good thing is I have brand new hardware, so I'm going to be putting this one in. So let's look at the control arm that we just removed, and the ball joint actually looks okay. It's not loose or anything. The boot's in good shape, so I'm not concerned about that area. However, the bushing that goes onto the subframe, this is what I believe is the cause for the vibrations I've been feeling. And if you can see how this one is all loose, and the bushing has already separated from the outer rim in different areas. So this is no good. You can see the new one here is completely solid. There's no excessive play, and the rear bushing is not torn or separated in any way. Alright, so now we gotta put the new one in. It's pretty much the same process in reverse. Now once you get to a certain point here, you're gonna need to counter hold the ball joint or it'll just spin with the nut and you won't get it tight. So 6mm Allen wrench. And then you can continue. Once it's tight enough though, you will be able to get your torque wrench in there without the Allen wrench, of course, and finish it off. Great, so we now have everything installed and you have the new control arms down here as well as the sway bar link. I have also torqued down all of the ball joints, so both ends of the control arms to the knuckle here and the sway bar link. The only thing left to do is to torque down the bushings that attach the control arms to the frame, and those you have to do under load, so I can't torque those down while the car is in the air, and we'll get to that in a minute. In the meantime, all you need to do is get the bolts through and tighten the nuts just enough so that they're snug in there, and maybe after they're snug, just pull back maybe about a half a turn to keep them secure but not tight as you bring the car down. Now let me show you what I did to get the control arm bushings torqued down to spec with the suspension under load. So I'm using these boot cribs you see here that I built myself for jobs such as this, and these are about 8 inches tall, and they do give me about a foot of added clearance, which is just barely enough for me to get under there and fit my torque wrenches, etc. Now the Wishbone control arm, or the short arm, is fairly easy. In fact, I've done this before without even racing the car, with the car at ground height, if you can squeeze your arms there somehow. And these ones require 59 foot-pound of torque, which is something I could easily get with my medium-sized torque wrench, so no issues there. Now these big ones, the thrust arms, are a different story. They're at a weird angle and they do require 94 foot-pounds of torque, which means I needed to use my big torque wrench. Now there was no way, at least at this height, that I could get the angle I needed and the range of motion to get to torque this thing down. So what I did was I used my medium torque wrench. This one goes all the way to 80 foot-pounds, and I basically pulled until it clicked, and then I used the ratchet to do another 2 or 3 hard pulls just to try and get it as tight as I could in there. And that's gonna be enough, at least, for me to take the car over to an alignment shop, which I'm gonna need to anyways, and then I'll have them finish off and torque it down to spec.